everyone, welcome to a new video. In this video I want to talk about APS-C cameras and a cheap way into photography. I recently done a video about my full frame gear, which might depress some of you guys out there because you'd be thinking, oh, how can he afford all that equipment? Well, it spent me many years to acquire that equipment, so don't be disheartened, and it's taken me a long time to save up for that. But I want to talk about where I come from, how I started, and maybe this will help you new starters into photography out there as well as students. So as a beginner, I'll give you a suggestion about how you can get into photography. But first of all, I'll just tell you briefly how I started. I started out at college, then I moved on to APS-C cameras, budget ones, then more pro grade ones, and then full frame cameras basically. So I started off on the 450D, which was your basic digital SLR, 8 megapixel. Then I moved up onto the 600D, which was a Rebel, your basic digital SLR that can do video but not autofocus in video, and it was about 24 megapixel sensor, 6 frames per second. It was a bit limiting, so I moved to the 7D, which had 8 frames per second, but it only had an 18 megapixel sensor, so I kept both cameras. And then soon after that I got the 80D, which was a better camera, 24 megapixel, I think it was 7 frames per second, but it had good HD autofocus video at the time. And then I was looking at the 7D Mark II, couldn't afford it, so eventually I saved up for the 90D, which could do 4K video, had a 32 megapixel sensor and 10 frames per second. Great camera. And then soon after that I managed to pick up a second-hand 7D Mark II. These are APS-C cameras which don't cost the earth, especially if you buy second-hand. So the 7D that I purchased cost me about £400, the 600D cost me about I think it was £600, the 450D that I got to start off with was about £550 when it first came out. And the 7D I only spent about £400 getting that. The 80D was a bit more expensive at £800, and the 90D I think it was roughly around £1,200, something like that, with a lens. But you don't have to spend all that money. You can just get yourself a basic Rebel for about 250 quid off eBay and a selection of lenses. So let's talk about lenses you can get for your APS-C camera to start out with. So here is the 18-55, your basic kit lens. Kit lenses used to be considered rubbish, but they're a lot better now in the last 10 years. Kit lenses are really superb, optically speaking. They're not quite as good as an L lens, but an L lens is going to cost you a lot more money. Typically 2 to 3 times more expensive. And you're only getting 10 or 20% improvement in image quality. So I would highly recommend getting the kit lens, 18-55. The aperture is 3.5 to 5.6. It's image stabilized. Pick them up for about £80 to £100 off eBay, or even cheaper. So that's your standard lens sorted out. Now you might want to get a telephoto lens, such as this, which is the EFS 55 to 250. It works out at around 400mm when you take into account the 1.6 crop factor. You see, APS-C cameras are normally called crop sensor cameras because the times the lens focal length by 1.6 because a smaller sensor to full frame. That means lenses can be a lot cheaper. So something like this 55 to 250, which is around 400mm, will work out at about I don't know, 200 to 300 pound. You can probably get it a bit cheaper used on eBay. So it's not a big investment. The problem with crop sensor cameras, they do magnify your focal length by 1.6. So the problem with that is when you get wide angle lenses, you need to get something really wide to get scenes in shot or do vlogs of yourself quite close up. If you have a standard lens, it's quite zoomed in like that into your face. So you want something that's a wide angle lens. So this is a 10 to 18. 4.5 to 5.6 IS STM lens. Highly recommend this lens. There are other lenses out there that you can adapt and put on cameras, but this is probably one of the best wide angle lenses I think out there for doing portraiture, landscapes, property photography, vlogs of yourself, it's a great lens. That'll set you back about £300, something like that. So really, under £1,000 for this kit, that's a really good starting point. And then obviously you can start using bigger lenses, more expensive lenses if you want to, like EF lenses. So here we have a 70-200 2.8 lens, that's a lot of lighting. It's a full frame lens designed for full frame sensors, but you can put them on your APS-C camera quite easily. So this turns the, when we figure out how to put it on, this turns the 200mm into 280mm because of the crop factor. So it's great for telephoto work, but not so great if you want to do something a bit further back, you know, that's more wide angle. The same is true of this other lens that I've got here, which is a very popular telephoto lens, the 100-400 Mark II L lens, weather sealed obviously, and you know, you typically will get 640mm out of this lens because of the crop factor. So again, great for telephoto work, not so great for close-up work. You know, if something comes close to you, it might be too much telephoto. But the advantage is you can always zoom it back a little bit. And then another lens which is quite popular is this lens, which is the Sigma Contemporary 150-600. Now it's a big lens, and obviously once you put the APS-C on there, it will look massive. Now that will give you the equivalent focal length of about 960mm, which is crazy, which means it's great for wildlife and sports action, and this is why a lot of people get the 7D Mark II and the 90D for doing sports, because they tend to have a high frame rate of 10 frames per second. So I just wanted to tell you about how you can get into photography on a budget. You don't have to buy the 7D Mark II, you can buy a cheap Rebel for 250 quid. Buy yourself a kit lens for about £80. Buy yourself something telephoto. It doesn't have to be this lens, there are other lenses out there which may be a tad bit sharper or more expensive. It all depends on your budget. But something like this, I would expect to pay maybe £200 off eBay for that. And then obviously the wide angle lens, the 10-18, it hasn't actually been out that long, this lens, in respect to, you know, the 7D Mark II for example. But it's a very useful lens, and it's not that expensive. You can pick them up between £200 and £300 as said. So if you just got a Rebel camera and those three lenses, you're talking less than £1,000 just to start out. And that is a great beginner kit for anyone who's starting out in photography, which says you don't need to spend a ton of money to get into the hobby. And for me, this is a perfect student setup. You can perfectly use this to do indoor property photography, landscapes, portraiture, wildlife, sports action. The only thing you might be limited to is indoor photography, because there won't be a lot of ambient light, and that's why some people would probably want to get a 2.8 lens like this, just so you've got that capability. Is APS-C going to be sharper than full frame cameras, or just as good? Probably not, because, you know, the thing with photography is the more light you've got, the better quality your image will be, and the lower your ISO can be. If you're always having to rack up your ISO, your image quality is always going to drop. When you're able to lower your ISO and make your sensor less sensitive, your images will have less grain and noise in it, and it will be a better quality image. So that's just a tip for you guys out there new to photography. Whenever possible, lower your ISO to the lowest you can possibly get away with to get the cleanest, crispest, best quality image you can possibly get. So I hope this video was a little bit helpful, giving you a bit of a guide on how to get into photography from a beginner's point of view. You don't have to spend a ton of money. Yeah, it's nice to have the L lenses, the RF cameras, you know, the 5D Mark IVs. And so yes, having full frame cameras and full frame lenses is great and fantastic because they give you clean, crisp imagery. However, not everyone can afford that equipment. When you're ready to do it professionally, then you can afford the full frame cameras. Then you can do your portrait photography professionally. You can do your landscape and indoor property photography professionally, sports and wildlife action professionally. Then I think you're ready to move up to full frame. But if you're just starting out, stick to APS-C cameras and lenses and then work your way up in time. It's not going to happen overnight, guys. It's going to take many, many years to build up your equipment to professional grade level. But it's not to say you can't get professional results from APS-C cameras. You can. The old saying goes, it's not the camera, but it's the photographer that makes the image. And that is incredibly true. Anyone can pick a camera up and take a picture, but not anyone can take a great picture. Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.